Thanks for having us, by the way.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
So Shane, I'd like to kind of start with a question for you, and I'd like to remind our audience that you're totally welcome to come up to the mics and ask questions as well, and I'll see you and get to you. But when I describe this film to people asking about the film festival or anything, I kind of say it's your thesis statement from 10 years of work on salmon films and kind of what. So can you describe for people who may not know kind of what led up to this film?
Yeah, it really was a culmination of 10 years, like really focusing on documentaries that focused on a lot about salmon, because that really was kind of my genesis into filmmaking. I was going to school at Humboldt State University studying fisheries biology, and before that, I'd worked in the film industry down in Hollywood, and it was kind of that time during school where I kind of like had this kind of epiphany that I wanted to kind of merge storytelling with science in a way that could potentially lead to impact. So I've basically, this is feature film number 7 in the last 10 years, and I've done about 100 shorts related. So I've been like kind of on this mission, this salmon mission, and originally, this film in particular was supposed to just be a portrait on Mike and his genetic work, and wasn't able to feature it in my film Chehalis, The Watershed Moment. So I was like really excited to dive into the genetics, and then once it was just the classic story of the onion just peeling and the layers, and once I realized just kind of how on edge the last of the spring Chinook populations were that have been a fabric of my entire life up in Washington State, I decided to kind of just expand the scope of the film and try to travel to as many of these populations as I could. And it turns out it's really hard to find spring Chinook. I mean, that's what took so long, was just getting in the water and actually finding fish to shoot. So,
Yeah, you kind of need shots of fish for a fish film. So
yeah.
that, yeah. But Mike, in the film, we kind of see you in your lab and working with the genetics, and it's so neat to be able to take in place and be part of that as an audience member to see kind of the behind the scenes science. But in one scene, we see you talking about what makes springers unique and finding that specific gene. So could you kind of take us behind the scenes a little bit of in your lab and what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of my dream experiment because I grew up fishing for springers, and I didn't, life is interesting. I didn't plan to become a geneticist, but when I did, the thing I wanted to do was try to figure out, what makes spring Chinook, and how they differ from fall Chinook, and so, um, it really comes down to technology. So why was I and my lab able to do that? Well, just technology has evolved a lot in the last 20 years. So if we would have tried to find the spring Chinook gene 20 years ago, it would have cost tens of millions of dollars. And so really it's this evolution of the technology that allows us to generate massive amounts of genetic information from anything. And having access to that, I was sort of on the cutting edge of that technology, the development of it. And that's what put me in the position to be able to try to find the spring Chinook gene and understand the evolution of spring Chinook, and then the conservation consequences of what's happening right now. It wasn't, I didn't know what we were going to find, so it wasn't like uh, yeah. So I don't know if does that answer your question to some extent?
Absolutely, yeah. It just seems really exciting and kind of like, I don't know, just a ride to be able to get to that point and be able to be in this day and age with science to be able to find it to there.
Yeah, one more thing. One interesting thing is a lot of science is just day to day work. It's few and far between when something happens where you actually get a really exciting result. Those types of days might only happen, once every couple of years, that kind of thing. A lot of it's just the grind, the daily grind, and so it's rewarding when things actually come together and you can get a scientific result that's really exciting and meaningful. And so you don't forget those days.
Absolutely, yeah. It kind of makes all those grueling days worth it, the grind and everything, to be able to live out a lifelong dream and figure out what makes them unique. But yeah, another question on genetics. In the film, it's so well writes out the in science communications kind of how the genes are doing and with climate change and all these impacts that are having extreme impacts on these salmon. And so I had the experience to go down to LA, and there's a wonderful fossil museum there, and they're digging up fossils currently. And something that was brought up was with climate change, why can't species just adapt quicker? So can you talk a little bit about the timeline with these fish and how climate change is impacting them?
Yeah, it's a complex question. I'll try to keep it reasonable in terms of time. Spring run timing is actually an adaptation to a hot summer or warm summer Mediterranean climate. So spring run timing only exists at the extreme southern end of the southern end of the range of Chinook salmon. So, in many ways, spring run timing is an adaptation to a hot or warmer environment. Mutation, when DNA replicates, when an organism replicates its DNA to pass on to the next generation, that's a process that is it has extremely high fidelity, but random mutations are introduced, and most of those mutations are either non-functional or they have a slightly detrimental function. But sometimes random mutations pop up, and they provide a novel characteristics to the individuals that inherit those mutations that allow them to do something or utilize habitat that couldn't previously be used. And so, but waiting for these types of random mutations, and like with spring run timing, it's probably not a single mutation in that gene. It's a whole series of mutations across this region, this specific gene that produces this genetic variant that causes individuals to have this early migration timing. It's not just timing. They store a bunch of fat. Their sexual maturation is distinct. So it's a single gene that has a lot of complex physiological and behavioral consequences. Okay. So the key is that when we look across all the spring Chinook throughout the entire range, there's all the spring Chinook that exist anywhere are all descendants of a single evolutionary event and genetic variant that was produced a long time ago in evolutionary history, maybe 1 million years ago or something like that. So waiting, we don't know exactly how long, if we lost that genetic variant that exists right there, we don't know exactly how long we'd have to wait for it to come back, but everything indicates that it would be time frames that we just don't think on. Because if those mutations, new genetic variants were popping up routinely new genetic variants that produce the spring run timing, we'd expect to see those throughout the range. There'd be different spring Chinook populations would have different genetic variants, and that's not the case. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much for eloquently answering my complicated question. I really appreciate it, and we all got a science lesson. But it looks like we have a question from the audience, so if you'd like to.
Thanks, Cassidy. Whoa, that works pretty well. I have a multi-part question, so sorry in advance. And also, I don't think I'm ever going to eat wild-caught salmon again, so.
It just depends what it is. There's totally sustainable wild salmon populations.
Yeah.
The spring run's not.
So my question is surrounding the Snake River. And I guess the first question is, are there any listed spring Chinook runs, I guess A, in the Columbia, and B, more specifically in the Snake? And I guess going into that, do you see, you mentioned the four generations of Snake River, before they could possibly go extinct there. Do you see the dam removal of those 4 lower Snake River dams happening faster than they happened in the Klamath? So a lot of nuance there.
Yeah, so the Snake River fight's been going for 30 years already. So they've studied it to death, and going back to those are listed populations under the Endangered Species Act. NOAA released their 5-year review a couple months ago, where they basically admitted they're still going down, but they didn't uplist them, or they didn't really come up with any solutions. So I'm sure that will be challenged. there's a lot of momentum, about replacing the benefits of those dams right now, which are completely replaceable right now. The transportation, there's a perfectly good rail line instead of barging that goes along the river all the way to the next terminal down there, and it only produces about 1 to 2% of the grid up there, the electricity. Nez Perce, for example, is working on a intertribal energy network, this virtual power plant that could tap into different nations across the country to replace the power. So they're kind of coming up with their own, solution to replace the power benefits from the dam. And as far as like ag benefits from those dams, they wouldn't be affected. Breaching those dams wouldn't have any impact on the ag situation there. So, where are we at? This all kind of came out with a report that Governor Jay Inslee and Patty Murray came out with that basically said the benefits from the dams could be replaced. So yes, we are up against the timeline with those fish, and there is solutions to have the benefits those dams provide and have fish, and the fight continues. I was just in Washington with Nez Perce in July and documenting. I got a whole film on that coming out in a couple of months called Covenant of the Salmon People. That's just a portrait of their journey to take the dams down and their ancient covenant with the salmon. And then I'm also working on the Klamath Dam removal film. We've been working on it for 2 years, and we got 3 years to go there. So we're just starting to ramp up production on this story as well.
Wow. Thank you so much for the question from our audience. It looks like we have one more.
Well, you just mentioned the Klamath Dam project, and I was very curious about the expected impact on the salmon population in the Klamath, but also whether it seems like the success with the anticipated success with removing those dams might be some sort of, or might have some impact in these other fights that are happening, like on the snake. Do you anticipate that, being able to show this sort of improvement or lack of detriment impacting those fights elsewhere?
You want to start biological?
Maybe take a stab at it, and I'll see if I can clean up.
They're two completely different dam stories, right? It's the same with the same outcome, is that they're having serious impacts on fish and water quality and river health. Do I think that the Klamath story I feel like there's elements of the last 20, 30 years of the Klamath story that can be influential in the Snake River campaign for sure, blueprint-wise. Absolutely. And I think a lot of that, there is a lot of crossover with the Snake River and Klamath Dam story. And I know that there's a lot out there that the Klamath is this, this slippery slope that we're going to start tearing every dam out after Klamath, and there's kind of this fear that's the case. But really what we're talking about in a lot of these places is, we're up against extinction, we're up against social justice issues, we're up against water quality issues, and there's so many situations, not all dams, but many dams the benefits can be replaced. And so it's kind of like these cost benefit analysis is the way I like to look at the dam situation. There's plenty of dams that are providing, social benefits right now that won't come out. But, in an issue like the snake, we can replace the benefits, and we're subsidizing the benefits right now to the tune of $24,000 per barge of grain that gets down to Columbia. And we're subsidizing the power, and we're spending billions of dollars on salmon recovery. That's not, it's not helping. It might be slowing down extinction, but it's still on that trajectory.
Great. Thank you so much for the question.
You want to touch on the biological, Klamath Dam?
Yeah, I think salmon are phenomenal in many ways, and you just got to give them a chance. I think there'll be some short-term negative impacts on fall Chinook from dam removal, but I think the river is going to recover, and it's going to ultimately be a benefit. in my lifetime, will we see wild populations of spring run here in the Upper Basin? I don't know. I certainly hope so, but it's tough because we're working with a lot of the genetic material that would be used to colonize the Upper Basin is in really rough shape. But it's I'm going to do what I can. I say this in the film, so I'm just saying the same thing again now. And so, I think being realistic about some of the challenges in terms of spring Chinook recovery in the Upper Basin is useful. But yeah, those dam removal will benefit multiple species in numerous ways.
I think we're going to see, that the hydro reach there's been a lot of really interesting thermal mapping recently to show all these cold water springs in that area that are just lost in these reservoirs that are just toxic algae reservoirs in the summertime now. So I think that hydro reach where the dams is going to be really, really important, not just for like providing cold water refuge to the juveniles, but also for some of the early migrator fall fish or these summer migrators that are struggling, like as of the last few weeks down the lower river with Calamaris disease from warm water. I think that reach is going to surprise us all, and I think it's going to help eliminate the Saratonova Shasta disease once the river can flow naturally again, which is killing a lot of the juveniles in the lower river and is requiring extra water from up here to flush disease out, artificial flushes from the upper basin. So there's going to be a lot of really interesting things to document, kind of the before and after over the next few years.
Absolutely. You'll be pretty busy, Shane. I have a feeling. But yeah, I mean, as a non-native and someone who's not even from the area, I just can't think of a more beautiful or hopeful thing than seeing salmon back up in this area and after the dams come out. And, hopefully that's what we'll see with salmon. I mean, like the film says, there's so many challenges, but if you give them a chance, then hopefully, maybe if it's not in our lifetimes, we will see that come back. You also mentioned the impacts of what science could have on policy. And Shane, you touched on this a little bit with your intro about how maybe filmmaking can also bring awareness. And I think with salmon, people tend to go with charismatic species a little bit more as far as like thinking about endangered species and maybe caring a little bit. So I think there's magic in a film like this where it does show and does get people to care about maybe an underrated kind of species. But can you talk a little bit maybe about science and policy and that interaction and what we might see in the future? Another loaded question.
Well, yeah, I think there will be federal listings. Spring Chinook throughout the range will become listed. There's some interesting nuances there that maybe it's not it might turn out that the feds refuse to split spring Chinook into their own conservation unit, but they ultimately choose to list spring and fall Chinook together. And so you'll have a lot of places where fall Chinook become listed with spring Chinook, which is unnecessary, but that may be the way this plays out. That's one of the things that I think there will be before in the next 5 years multiple federal spring Chinook listings.
I would add, like, if there's like one takeaway I'd want the audience to take away from it's just the importance of genetic diversity in salmon, and I think that's the one thing that management has screwed up royally on so bad for the last 150 years of fisheries management, is that just the thought that they can re-evolve from other creeks and rivers and just how place-based salmon are. If people can take that away and if policy can start implementing that, or if the bureaucracies can start implementing that into the policies more, that's our only hope is really, recognizing that each one of these populations adapted to that specific river or creek.
Yes. So we have a question from the audience.
Hi. First off, I just want to say congratulations. I wasn't expecting your film to be so emotionally moving, but I think, that's the goal of any film, even if it's a documentary, and I thought you executed it very well. This is kind of a random question, but my first year of college, I actually lived here and went to OIT to be an engineer. and then I ended up going to Portland and getting an art degree. And you talked about like film and then science and kind of merging them, and the way that you talk about the stuff that you believe in, I think is very similar to hearing an artist talk about their painting or anything else that they're passionate about. So I'm just curious for both of you, if you have any philosophies or ways of looking at the merging of science and art, or how science actually is art.
Well, I think from my standpoint, what kind of inspired me to kind of do science-based filmmaking was bringing in emotion into scientific stuff that I thought was really interesting, but I knew that most people would never read these scientific papers. And that's kind of when I was in college doing fisheries biology, I would go down these rabbit holes and on these different scientific topics and found them so interesting. And I felt like so much of that stuff, I just wanted the world to kind of, see some of this science. So, but I realized that bringing in emotion and story into it was the only way to do it. And that was kind of my story into what I do, and that convergence of in storytelling styles.
I thought of something to say, and now I can't think of it. I forgot it, and about as fast as I thought of it.
We can let you think on it too.
Well, I guess one thing is that I think Russ says this in the film. He says, ultimately, the fate of these fish is in the public's hands. And, as scientists, we can generate this information, but it's ultimately really important to raise awareness and bring it to the general public, bring it outside of the scientific community. And I think art is a way to do that. There's going to be, I've been yelling as loud as I can about this for years. We've been working on this for about 10, specifically on this project, on the runtiming project, for 10 years, but then building the groundwork behind it for 20 years. I've been working on this for that long. And, as it's been almost a decade since we've basically understood this issue with spring run, that if they disappear, they're not going to come back. And, I've been screaming that in my world, but I was unable to reach a large audience. And so with this film, Shane is able to do that. Already, this was on PBS in Washington, and tens of thousands of people probably saw it. So for me, that it seems like that's the one great way that how art and science can be merged.
Thank you so much for the question, Jeremy. Anna, it looks like we have time for just about 2 more questions. So Anna, if you'd like to go.
Sure. I really loved the film. I thought it was extremely impactful. You succeeded. On the subject of building awareness, though, there's so many 501c3, organizations that purport to support this cause or that cause. What organizations would you say we should all be aware of that are doing the work to save spring salmon?
There are a lot of organizations out there, and I would say, my whole philosophy on conservation is really getting involved in your place. The salmon have their genetic place, in just being involved with conservation groups that work in your backyard on issues that you really care about, because it's completely overwhelming. I mean, there's probably 20 fish groups alone in the Northwest. So do I have a specific one? Okay. Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to name any specific ones either. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of groups out there. They all have different strategies. The strategies are complementary. Some are more hardline. Some are more willing to compromise. Some focus more broadly. Some focus on specific watersheds. I think you can't go wrong in your place. Engaging with whatever organizations are dedicated to your place. Beyond that, some organizations sell themselves better than others and attract more money, and they do work. I'm unwilling to name any specific organizations.
I'm a big advocate for the grassroots, the people on the ground in the local communities. That's where my passion lies.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Taylor, would you like to ask?
Hi, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for making the film. You're absolutely 100% right. As a board member here and as a local tribal member, you know, the Klamath and Modoc and Yehuskan people have been working for the Bring the Salmon Home effort for, you know, since the endangered species was listed here in '86, and it directly affects the spring Chinook salmon. With what we're trying to do here is if the Klamath River is not healthy enough once they get here to the lake, then the same thing's going to happen to the salmon that is happening to the Chwam, and with, you know, we're facing that extinction. So I just wanted to publicly say thank you for making these films. These are the platforms where they gain the most attention, and I do recommend, you know, the Klamath River tribes for their grassroots efforts, and our local Ombodot Klamath Tribal Aquatics Department, and the Klamath tribes that are working to bring the salmon home to Klamath County. So publicly, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, we do have the Lost Salmon feature poster for you. Thank you again so much both for being here. Can we get one more round of applause for Shane and Dr. Mike Miller?
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it. And up next, we have Because We're Family, so be sure to stick around. Thank you.